Hello, this is Steve. Thank you for joining me for another video on algebra's basic functions. In this video we're going to talk about the square root function. Got f of x equals radical x. Now before we go too far with this function, I want to talk about the radical symbol and the square root symbol and how we work with it in mathematics. Because a lot of times people get confused by this symbol because they think that if you put a 9 under there and ask for the square root of 9, that the answer is plus or minus 3. But that's false, everyone. You don't ever want to say that. The square root of 9 is actually just 3, because the square root symbol is asking for the positive square root only. So when you take the square root of 9, please don't say plus or minus 3, just say 3. Now where does that plus or minus come from? Because I know we've all seen that before. And where that comes from is when you ask a slightly different question, when you ask a question like this, which is not asking for the square root of 9, it's asking what number or numbers can you square to get 9. And the way you solve this is you take a square root of both sides. But when you take the square root of both sides, you introduce the plus or minus symbol. So this does end up being plus or minus 3. So you have to pay attention to what question you're being asked. Are you being asked for the square root of 9, or are you being asked for what number do you square to get 9? And in the case of the square root function over here, we are always asking for the positive square root only. So when you take the square root of 16, you don't say plus or minus 4, you just say 4. When you take the square root of 100, you don't say plus or minus 10, you just say 10, just the positive root. And the square root function works in such a way that we can only plug non-negative numbers into it. We cannot take the square root of a negative number as far as domain is concerned. So when we're talking about the domain, we only include non-negative numbers, 0 to infinity. And you'll notice I used a bracket on 0, because you can take the square root of 0. The square root of 0 is 0, which I'll write down in a moment. And because we cannot get negative numbers out, the range is the same as the domain. It is also 0 to infinity. So now we know that when we're working with the square root function, we're not going to be working with any negative numbers. We're only going to plug non-negative numbers in, zeros and positives, and we're only going to get non-negative numbers out, zeros and positives. So I know that I can plug in 0 or any positive number. So I know the square root of 0 is 0, because 0 times 0 is 0. And I know the square root of 1 is 1, because 1 times 1 equals 1. Go ahead and write that there for you. Now, can you take the square root of 2? Absolutely, you can take the square root of 2, but the square root of 2 is a nasty decimal, so it's not a number we want to take the square root of for the purposes of drawing a sketch of the graph. So even though this is allowed, this number right here is not a good number to graph. It's irrational. So the question you want to ask yourself is, instead of using 2, what is a number that I just know the square root of off the top of my head? Well, you might say, I know the square root of 100 off the top of my head, because it's 10. And I would say, yeah, that's absolutely true, but do you really want to draw an x-axis that goes all the way out to 100? So what we want to focus on is the smaller positive numbers that we know the square roots of. So here we go. Square root of 0 is 0, square root of 1 is 1, square root of 4 is 2, and the next easy number to know the square root of is 9. Square root of that is 3. And if you wanted to do one more, you do 16 and 4. Make that look more like a 16 there for you. And then we plot our points. Note that when I draw my coordinate system, I'm only worried about the positive x-axis and the positive y-axis. There's 0, 0. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1, 2, 3. There's 1, 1. There's 4, 2. There's 9, 3. You get this thing that sort of looks like a parabola fell over then got sort of buried in the ground. So this is the graph of the square root function. And just as a reminder, so you have it down here too, but both the domain and range are going to be 0 to infinity. Okay, thank you for watching.